My name is Charlie Miller, and I'm here interviewing Evelyn Moy. Today's date is July 20th, 2023, and we're interviewing via Zoom. The first question I'm going to ask you is your date and place of birth.
My birth date is May 13th, 1953, and I was born in Washington, D.C.
All right, and what are the names of your parents, their occupations, and did they have any military history?
My dad, his Chinese name is Mugyu Moy, and then he took on the name of Frank Moy. And my mom took on the name of Florence Moy, and she uses Florence Hui Moy. And yes, everybody in my family served, actually, and my dad served in World War II.
Nice. And what schooling did you have before entering the military?
What type of schooling did I have?
Yeah.
Okay, I was born in Washington, D.C., but I traveled all over the United States, and then my parents took us to Hong Kong and Macau, and we were trying to get into China, but the Cultural Revolution was happening, and the American Embassy told us that if we went into China, we couldn't get out. So I actually attended Chinese school for 2 years, and then we came back to the United States in 1966. And I went to elementary school in Washington, D.C., Watkins, Hine Junior High in D.C., and McKinley Technical School in D.C. Then I went to college at University of Maryland.
And did you hold any jobs before entering the military?
I held so many jobs. My parents had a carry-out in Fort Worth, Texas. And so in the Chinese family, everybody works. So I can actually say I've been working since the age of 6, 8, as soon as I could do anything. And one of the funny stories I tell people was that during the carry-out, the Chinese carry-out, my mom grew bean sprouts. And in those days, you had to take off the little green cap off of the bean sprout. So I stood in front of this huge basin of water with all these little green caps of bean sprouts. And I think I was about 7, 8, 9, around that age, maybe younger. But I was taking off the bean sprouts. I tell this as a funny story, that I just couldn't wait until I was 18 so I could blow the joint and leave and didn't have to do this kind of labor. So everybody in the family helped in the Chinese carry-out as soon as we could. So one of the things to get out of doing work was to go to the library and check out the maximum number of books. So my brothers and I checked out 10 books each, and then we would read each other's books. And that was our secret to get out of work, working for my mom and dad.
Nice. And what were your motivations to join the service?
Well, let me just add about the different jobs, because there was a very important story before I get to the part of the motivation. My dad got very sick when we were actually quite young. And so then my mother had to take care of the family, and that was very, very difficult. So then we had a candy store. Can you imagine a child having worked at a candy store? So that was a lot of fun. Of course, I stole a lot of candy and ate that. But to pay my dad's hospital bill, which was about $15,000, I had to get whatever job that I could. So I ended up working at a Chinese restaurant. And of course, the plates were very heavy, but a group of women came in, and I had a lot of makeup. I had a ponytail. It was a disco era. And they said, "Honey, what's your story here?" And I said, "Well, my dad got sick and I need to come up with $5,000. And so they said, "Well, you need to be a cocktail waitress." So long story short, I started slinging drinks at the hottest club in town. But then I joined the military. To segue into that story, I was in college, and it was during the women's movement around the 1970s. And I was enlisted then. So I told these customers, oh, I want to become a naval officer. I want to go higher. I want to make something of myself. And one of the customers actually laughed in my face. And the hostess, she wanted to be a doctor. So I just, I was a cocktail waitress at that time. I couldn't yell at the customer. So I just got to thinking, she can be a doctor, but I can't be a naval officer. So that made me even more determined to set on the path to get more education, to better myself. And when I did join the Navy back in 1979, I saw a lot. They put me at the best unit in the entire Navy. And this is honest truth. I was at the Pentagon at the Navy Command Center. So I started from the top instead of at the bottom. And I learned a lot. I was mentored. I had a lot of chiefs, a lot of people wondering why. Why is it that you have a college degree and you're not an officer? So I thought, well, I never thought about it. And so I explored that. And then I applied and I was rejected, but I didn't give up.
And were you told why you were rejected?
Well, being commissioned is a big deal, of course. And there are a lot of different quotas, billets, quotas, and the Navy works in this way. They have the number of officers that they need. And then when the force gets too large or they don't need a certain amount of officers, they can actually shrink the billets. So there's a variety of reasons of how many officers come into the force every year. Now, you can become an officer in various ways. I mean, you've heard of ROTC. My husband went through that route. And so you could be going through a regular college, and then when you come out of ROTC, then you're commissioned as a second lieutenant or an ensign or whatever service that you want to go to. And then you can, of course, go to the service academies. Of course, you need a nomination by your Congress member. So I really encourage people to try to apply for those scholarships. And the taxpayer pays for that college education. So if you leave sooner than your commission, then you actually have to pay back the American people. And then there's something called Officer Candidate School, and that's a different path. You're selected, and then you go to learn how to become an officer, and then they train you. So after I was rejected, it was a huge blessing in disguise. I didn't know it at that time, but I started a small business at the age of 29 with two business partners, and we started a design engrossing business, which is also called calligraphy. And this is the best kept secret in Washington, D.C. Nobody talks about it, but you think, who makes all these beautiful resolutions that are given to all these associations? Well, behind the scenes, there are professionals. They're called engrossers. So I was working on starting my business, and it was very difficult. I was only 29 years old, but we decided to go for it. And then simultaneously, I pursued my second chance to become an officer. And it took 4 years before I had that opportunity again, because they don't commission, they don't select all the time. So when I came up again for my second chance, of course, I just thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be determined. And then I found out there was a senator's son who was competing against me. And I said to my recruiter, I don't have a chance. I'm done. There's no way they'll select me with the senator's son competing against me. And the recruiter said, in all of his wisdom, he said, relax. It doesn't work that way. So I just put my package together, and it was really quite a moment, because when I got the news, it was like a fairy godmother just touching my shoulders, and all of a sudden I had gold on my shoulders and I was a commissioned officer. So that route is called the direct commission, which basically means you come locked and loaded. The military needs your skill set, and they're just like doctors, public affairs officers. You can go that route.
I do kind of want to jump back a little bit. Could I ask about your basic training experience and how it was like for you?
Okay, so I was a reservist. So I joined the Naval Reserve because during the 1970s, when the women's movement was going on, after my dad served in World War II, and then my older brother, was drafted during the Vietnam era. So then that was a huge shock to my family, because all of a sudden my older brother was going to war, and they drafted him into the Marine Corps. And then right after that, my younger brother, straight out of high school, he joined the United States Navy. And all of a sudden, I'm at home with my dad sick and my mom. The women's movement was going on. And then aside here, my mom was actually a war bride also. That's a whole fascinating story. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do my part, but I'm only going to do 2 years, and then I'm going to get out. So I said, I got to put my mouth, my words where my mouth is, my actions. I have to back up my actions. So at the age of 25, I went to the recruiter, and he tried to make me a yeoman. And that's nothing wrong with being a yeoman. That's a rate, which means you do administrative things. But I had a college degree in design and advertising. So I said to the recruiter, can we see that list? And so he showed me the list. I went down the list, and it said draftsman illustrator. I said, I want to be this. I have a college degree. And he says, all right, well, we're kind of overmanned, but we'll take you. So he said, but you can't join until you're 26, because their quotas were already 400% over. But during the Reagan years, they were manning up the force at that time. So on my 26th birthday, I went to the recruiting office and raised my right hand.
Nice. And after basic training, what was your first assignment?
Well, for the basic trainer, because I had a college degree, they sent me to New Orleans. And I thought, oh, yay, this is good. So I went down to New Orleans, and they marched us around, and it was a lot of fun. I met other people who were coming into the reserve force at that time. So my basic training was actually 2 weeks in New Orleans. And then when I became an officer, they sent me to something called knife and fork school, which is so funny because as an officer, we have to be refined. We need to know the proper use of the knife and fork. So that's why they call it knife and fork school. So they sent me to Pensacola, Florida, and I thought, it's getting better. So and they marched us around the parking lot because where I had our college degree. I'd been in the Navy for 8 years by that time. So yet again, we marched around in the parking lots. And then after that, they said, you're trained up, you know the culture, you know what to do, you need to get to work.
And what type of work were you doing, like when you were either assigned or stationed somewhere? What would your like a day in your life entail?
Well, when I was enlisted, I was a draftsman illustrator. That basically means you're working graphics. So doing graphics, doing the briefs for the officers. So I worked behind the scenes, and that was a lot of fun because during some of the exercises, and I would always choose the midnight shift, the graveyard shift, as they call it. I would be preparing the briefs for the officers the next morning. But when I was commissioned as a professional, the public affairs officers worked to make sure that the message of the Navy is conveyed properly to the American people and to our allies. So as an officer, we were sent to many, many locations. I mean, it was a very rich and integrated career because we were sent to work with the other services. We were sent to work with our NATO allies, sent all over the world. I've done duty in London, Stuttgart, Bahrain. I worked on ships. During Desert Storm, Desert Shield, I was flying up and down the coast, welcoming all the ships home. But as an ensign, my first duty was actually at the inaugural ball. So I can honestly say it was a fantastic career from enlisted to officer. You get to go so many places. You cover so many events. Of course, there are sad events like ship explosions and sailors injured and things like that you have to cover. But we also did a lot of media training up at the War College. So we got to play reporters to help the senior officers learn how to conduct themselves during a press conference, how to field questions. Again, the important point here is to make sure that the American people understand the mission of the military, specifically the Navy, and that we are responsible to the taxpayer because it's taxpayer dollars that keep our jobs, and they want to hear the truth. So that's what public affairs officers do, is to help facilitate that messages. And then, of course, at the very higher levels, the captains and admirals, and actually all along in the career, you could be the spokesperson for the Navy.
And when you were in like foreign countries in uniform, how did people perceive you being there? Were they excited to see like American troops in their land, or did you ever feel like you were intruding on their culture?
Well, that's a really interesting question because before we go on these active duty for training, as they call it, on these exercises or for duty, they always brief us on the culture of the land, of the country that we're going to. So you have to be very, very aware of what the people are thinking, how they view Americans. Make sure you don't offend the host country. And it was great fun. I worked with our NATO partners. I remember when I worked the Link Seas exercise, this was in Portugal, and the host actually took us to a casino one time. He gave me his money to play at the casino. And I thought, no, you can't do that. And then at another time, I turned 40 in Portugal. I had a birthday. And to my surprise, everybody had a bar in their office, and they all pulled out bottles of wine and toasted me, of course. And I had to drink. So of course, you know what happened there. So when in Rome, do as the Romans. It's a great. It was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of hard work. I can't say that it wasn't a lot of hard work, especially in the 1990s. They had something called Joint Force Integration, which meant as a reserve member, you had to know everything your active duty counterpart was doing. So think about that. Once a month and 2 weeks a year or more, you had to know what your active duty counterpart was doing while holding down a job and having a family. So it's exciting, it's rewarding. There's a lot of camaraderie. I always feel like I'm doing a commercial for the United States Navy, and my colleagues always say that I could be a recruiter, which I think I could.
Can you tell us about the inaugural wall you served for and kind of how it all played out, your role in it, and what it looked like?
Okay, so I went as an ensign, and so that was my first time out. And the reason why I got to go was because my brother gave me $1,000 to buy the mess dress, the formal uniform. So I was assigned at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C. That's closest to the White House. Other colleagues were at Union Station or at some of the big hotels. And all evening long, you're kind of on standby until the president makes his rounds. And of course, being closest to the White House, we were there for hours in uniform. And what our role is, again, is always public affairs support. So let's say if a news reporter would come up to me at that time and say, Ensign Moy, I'd like to do an interview with such and such, some of the troops. And then through me, I would call back to headquarters, or else I would go straight over to one of the other military personnel and ask for an interview at that point, and then introduce the journalists or the media crew to that individual. Usually, it's not us that want to be in the interview itself, the public affairs officer. Our job is to facilitate those interviews and get the subject matter expert so that the media journalist or the reporter can get an accurate story, again, to the American people and to the audiences.
Is it fair to say that rank plays a big role in that? Meaning, if somebody wants a story, are you always going to the most senior person in kind of the field or in the Navy? Or do they ever kind of allow kind of everyday voices, lower ranks, to comment on anything?
The forces interviewed from the lowest ranking member to the highest ranking member, because everybody has a story.
Yeah.
Best story comes from the horse's mouth, so to speak, that the young enlisted person actually gives a better interview because they don't have all of the communication points and all of the professional things that they're checking off the box as they're doing the interview. They're actually speaking straight from the heart, and they don't have all the legalese and thinking so much about what their part in the force is. However, of course, rank has its privileges, and you want the subject matter expert when you're talking about things like policy, strategy, some of the bigger, broad issues that would affect which direction policy would go. So, of course, the younger members would never talk about that, and they're encouraged not to answer or go to a different subject.
And what president was this for that you were working the inaugural wall?
Oh, that one, let's see, that one was for President Bush won, because I remember that when they finally showed up, the party was already in full swing. I mean, it was great fun. People are already dancing on the dance floor. And of course, in those days, they didn't allow us, because we're working members, to whip out cell phones. We didn't have cell phones at that time. BlackBerry, I didn't get a BlackBerry till much later. So you can't bring out a camera. You can't, you're working. So my biggest regret when I talk to younger officers, to anybody who's serving, is try to document your own career, because I look back and after 30 years, I just have a handful of pictures. Truly, I just have a handful.
Yeah, I think that's a good message. Mom, do you have any other questions? Burning questions?
Yeah. So I would love to get your perspective, just since you had such a long career and got to work with obviously the different branches. Could you tell us a little bit about what made your team at the Navy unique and different than maybe the public affairs officers who are sitting inside, Army or Marine?
Well, when you join the service, and you can join any service, as long as you meet the qualifications. Some of my colleagues have actually served in more than one service. So for me, I definitely chose one of the sea services. And of course, you have the Coast Guard, my dad in the Coast Guard, Marine Corps, the Navy Reserve. So for me, I just liked the mission. So you have to love the mission of the service. So I looked at the Navy. They have airplanes. They have ships, of course. They were all over the world. They were forward deployed. Just endless opportunities. And I think that's why my original idea of going to serve only 2 years ended up being, I count it as 31 years. Because, when you start 1979, you start counting 1, 2, 3 like that. But then the Navy says, well, they have this formula, your anniversary year. So on my records, it's 30 years, 30 good years, like fiscal year from the government. But I want to talk about my dad for a second, because he came over during the Chinese Exclusion Act, and he was only 16 years old. And during that time, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, the Chinese were forbidden to come into this country unless you were a diplomat, a student, or a merchant. And my grandfather was a merchant. So at the age of 16, my dad came over on a ship with his mom, and my grandfather sponsored him, of course. And 2 years later, he signed the registration card to be in the U.S. military. And you have to think about that. He left his home country of southern China at the age of 16. 2 years later, in his new country, he signed to be in the military and served in the Coast Guard Reserve. So, and the Coast Guard, they have a wonderful mission. They all do. But my service of choice was the United States Navy. And then after that, people always ask me, what did you do after the Navy? Well, I retired in 2010. And in 2018, I had the extreme good fortune to be part of the Chinese American World War II Veterans Recognition Project. And the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, they had this initiative to get a congressional gold medal for the 20 plus thousand Chinese Americans who served in World War II, of which my father was one of them. So I went on the Hill, and I tell people through my career, I once had this big idea to change the force. And so I had submitted the idea to my higher ranking colleagues, and they said, okay, well, just go ahead and do it yourself. Go on the Hill and advocate. Call up the congressmen, call up the senators. And I was incredulous. It's like, no, me go to the Hill? And they said, yes, we'll show you how to do it. And so one thing led to another. I mean, I had no idea. And so I went and pitched my idea. It was again, having big ideas. One thing led to another. I ended up going to the War College. I have a master's degree from the Naval War College, such a elite opportunity. You have no idea that to see the broad scope of the strategy of this nation is just amazing. So when this opportunity came up, I said, oh, I know how to do that. So for a year, we went on the Hill and we knocked on doors, and it was like Groundhog Day, basically, but it was very educational, very exhilarating, because you're going to get this congressional gold medal for this unrecognized honor of these 20 plus thousand Chinese Americans. 40% weren't even U.S. citizens when they served. So it was very hard. I learned the legislative process. And then in December of 2018 at 10 p.m., the bill was signed, and you could just hear the champagne corks popping all over the United States. And then because I had a design background, I also was asked to be on the design committee for the Congressional Gold Medal. So the generals, and I had no idea there were so many Chinese American generals and admirals, and some of the very high ranking, we all got together and we worked with the very, very professional team at the U.S. Mint. And we came up with the Congressional Gold Medal. And it's so much fun for me, because I remember actually putting hands on to some of the drawings to tweak the drawings so that I could show it to my team. Because for many people, learning how or visualizing something, they can't visualize it until they see it. So that was my part, not only to provide my own personal input, but to help tweak the drawings so that we could get closer and closer to our own Chinese American World War II veterans Congressional Gold Medal, which is now in the Smithsonian.
And can you talk a little bit about some of the objectives like your organization is trying to accomplish today?
The Chinese American Citizens Alliance?
Yeah.
Well, that's a civic organization. So they're always, trying to fight for the rights of Chinese Americans, making sure that, especially during the pandemic, many of the Asian people were attacked and all the hate crimes. So they're very active in moving those issues forward to make sure that the Asian community, the Chinese American community, is protected.
Got it.
How would you comment on kind of current state of affairs, maybe Chinese Americans who are currently serving in the military? Obviously, you opened a lot of doors for people and got acknowledgement, but are you close at all to kind of how those who are enlisted today feel?
Well, the force is always changing. And this is a very difficult time to serve, of course. I was, as a public affairs officer, sometimes I give impromptu speeches, sometimes I give canned speeches. It all depends on the amount of time I have to prepare. But during the pandemic, I was asked to speak about how many Chinese American women serve in the Navy. They had no statistics. So the number of women serving is so small, they had us lumped in together with all the other Asian groups. And I think that one of my biggest complaints centers around recruiting, that not enough Americans know about the military. They say that 80% of the people who serve actually have some member of their family who serve, like myself. My dad, I saw my dad. I didn't see my dad serve, but I knew about his service. I knew that it was honorable. I knew that it was something that was very important as an American citizen. Then I saw my brothers. So as a woman, I think there should be more interaction between the civilian population and the force, because it just seems like there's no training period. All of a sudden, you raise your right hand, and then you say the oath, then you can't get out, it seems. So a lot of people are quite nervous about that. But there are many programs like Junior ROTC or the Naval Sea Cadets, Young Marines, Young Merchant Marines. And this is for the youngster who's 15 years old, 10 years old. They can kind of try it out. And then a lot of programs, American Legion. So there's many opportunities to take a look at what the military has to offer. Of course, the military itself, they have air shows, Fleet Week. You can get aboard the ships. You can go to the air shows. You can interact. But it is a scary thing when you think about it. So the normal time for a person who thinks about it to the time they walk into the recruiting office is actually about 3 years. They have to give it a lot of thought.
Wow.
There's the physical aspect. You have to run and do sit-ups. You have to swim, that kind of thing. When I joined, I couldn't even run a block. I mean, I was in that poor of a shape, but little by little, you just put it together. I have a funny story of how just like any young person, you go into a depression. So I was depressed, in my 20s, couldn't figure it out, lost in the wilderness. So, but I wanted to get into the Navy, so I started running. I had to pass the test. So I didn't know anything about endorphins. So every time I came back from running, I wasn't depressed. So the more I ran, the more I became happier, and eventually I just reached my goal.
I was just thinking about how, so we live in San Francisco, I think, which I told you, and we have a really big Fleet Week here in October. And I never really thought about how that event, which spans over kind of, I guess, the 4-day weekend, allows you to get up close, touch the ship, meet, San Francisco becomes just infiltrated in a good way with all the service people. And of course, we have the Blue Angels, which is such a highlight for everybody. And I think every kid growing up in San Francisco is in awe, probably because of that event. But I never thought how that is, to some extent, a marketing event for the Navy.
Well, it's for the American people.
True. Yeah. No.
They have Fleet Weeks, air shows. This is for you. And now that when I look back, I just say the bar was so low to get into the military. I can't believe all I had to do was run a mile or a mile and a half, do a few sit-ups, have good grades on men. That's it. So I just say, try it out. Don't be scared of it. But it's a serious thing. It's a sobering thing. And people say, well, I joined for the college degree. No, your life is on the line. When you raise your right hand, it's not that. It's not you're doing it for the wrong reason. If you're doing it for a college degree, if you're doing it because to make your parents proud. No, you really have to believe in this, and you want to do it, and you're going to be more successful if you understand what the sacrifice is, the dedication, the commitment, because you will be part of that past, present, and future of all those who were in uniform. And from forever, you'll be brothers and sisters. There's no bond like that bond between veterans. It was the best decision of my life, and I really like that.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much for your service. If there's anything else you'd like to add that we didn't really cover, feel free. Yeah, we appreciate your time, appreciate your service, and you had a lot of great stories, so we enjoyed hearing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Evelyn, is there anything else you want to add? Any part that we didn't bring up?
I think that I want to just say that going forward into the future, there's many ways to serve our nation. The military is not for everyone. It really is not. There's a discipline there, a very serious discipline. And when you wear the cloth of the nation, as one admiral said, the cloth of the nation, you really have to believe in our country. And that will make you successful. There are many other ways to serve. You can be a teacher, you can go to AmeriCorps, you can do a Peace Corps. But I think that there's no greater honor for myself to, other than have served in this capacity, no greater honor than to be in uniform. Thank you.